Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone listening and watching. Once again, I want to take this opportunity to share some thought with you. And again, I want to remind you that your time and your attention are very appreciated. I also want to thank you for the comments and the question you asked in our previous podcast. I need those questions and I need those comments because they help us to understand how to put those podcasts together and how to have better content, and including what kind of guests we want to invite that will share topics and subjects that are meaningful to you, not just to me. So please give us comments, give us critics, make remarks. You're not going to offend me. It will help me do better to design those podcasts in a way that benefited you. My intention is for me to have those podcasts that you will in turn learn something from. You will in turn have better idea in terms of what's going on in our world, so you can better equip yourself to deal with the issues of our time. And so I want you to know that I look forward to hearing from you. And also, please, you know how the podcast system works. It's encouraging when people subscribe to the podcast. What that simply means to me, just to me, it means that you're interested in the topic and the subject that I am speaking about, that you can relate to them. And so your subscription is not for me to do anything with. I don't need anything personal from you. Simply subscribe to the podcast. That let me know that you're interested and that you encourage and that you look forward to continue to participate in those lectures and those comments, and of course the guests that we will be bringing to our podcast. Today we want to talk about something very special, something that we all can relate to. But again, let me welcome you once again to Mindful Conversation for Critical Time. I can't say that enough, and I know you know that we are actually living in critical time. Now that can be somewhat subjective, because there is no point of time in the history of the world, of humanity, where we can look and say it was not critical. The reason why I use the term critical is because of the issues and the events and the things that are happening in our lives, in the world, that are very critical. So it's not just critical for critical sake, but the events that are shaping and molding our future and the future of the next generation are critical, and I know you know that. So we call our platform Mindful Conversation for Critical Times. And again, Mindful Conversation for Critical Time, it's a production of InSearch Innovation. InSearch Innovation missions is to introduce revolutionary knowledge in this transforming world of ours. I believe this is a podcast, and I designed it intention to have conversations that are dedicated to exploring how rampant of emotional, psychological distrust and everything that mankind create, discontent. We're living in a world where people are very discontent. I don't have any discontentment in my life. I am very content with the things that happen in my life. So when we're talking about discontent, we're not talking about possession in and of itself, but we're talking about a sense of rejection and oppositions and attempted to reject everything there is. So a lot of people are discontent. So there is a spirit, a mentality of discontent and deconstructive noisemakers, I call them, that are drowning the world of humanity into absolute chaos. That's not new, it's just more critical in our time. And I know you know that. In addition to, we have what many social scientists are calling the postmodernists. I don't like the concept postmodernist, but we'll talk about that some other time, because when I hear the term postmodernist, I have no idea what are they talking about. And so as much as I have an idea what they intend to accomplish by referring to postmodernist, it really doesn't tell us exactly what's going on and who are these postmodernists. And if you look closely, those people out there who take on the social media that are referring to the concept of postmodernist, it have an implication, it have a predisposition attached to it. That means if I'm calling a group of people postmodernist, implied I'm not one. But if you take it in a broader concept in terms of where we exist, in terms of time, we're all living in a postmodern era. So there is the idea to call some people postmodernists as a belief system, as a ideological point of view. Again, it doesn't tell me much when we call postmodern. Nevertheless, for the purpose of conversation, I'm going to use it, but I plan to look deeper into it and find out what is deeper meaning and who are these postmodernists, because we are living in a postmodern era. If you take in terms of the prehistoric era, the modern era, we're talking about 4 or 5 centuries ago, and then we can pinpoint accurately when the modern era was transition into postmodernist. So it's not a group of people, it's a global ideology in terms of moving from one era of the world to another. Nevertheless, the postmodernists, as some call them, along with the technological revolution, weaponries, I call them, the industry that imbued it and infused into the technological revolution, are producing a wave of what you call indoctrination. They're using what I'm calling pseudoscientism ideology, that the human cognitive process cannot and will not be able to adapt to. And that's, in my view, a very critical. And so again, welcome to Mindful Conversation for critical time. And our topic for today is what I call tears and sorrows of life. And I ask a question: are there any more tears for us to cry? Mankind been crying for centuries, and there we are in the 21st century, as sociologists called it, the 21st century, yet we continue to cry. And so tears of sorrows is what fill the journey of humanity. And so I'm going to ask a question: are there any more tears left for us to cry? And if so, how long we're going to continue to cry, and what causing those tears and sorrow? Again, that's the topic of our conversation today. And so I ask another question following this question. It's a question that, like the philosophers do, they ask question upon question. Why is the human experience filled with so many tears and sorrow as well as suffering? You and I know very well these are questions that are asked throughout the century, but the fact that we're living in a critical time, I believe those questions need to be asked and will continue to be asked by the next generation. We actually can envision the next generation that's going to come after you and I will ask this question, given the fact that you and I, who are alive today, are making decisions that we're creating a future that we're going to hand over, we're going to pass on to the next generation. You can rest assured, if we continue to make the decision we're making today, if we continue to live the way we are living, if we continue to construct a world in every level as we are, the next generation experience will be filled with tears and sorrow, and they will be asking that question just the way I ask it: why the human experience is so filled with so many tears and sorrow? In my view, that is a very provocative thought, and it fit right on the real world of moral and ethical issues of past time as well as our time. This is a question that is at the heart of the current atmosphere we created, this contemporary movement, and can very well be said to expose the importance of the current state of affair we are having with life. Yes, very, in my view, a provocative question. This question also compels you and I, all of us, to take up the issues such as climate change, the climate doom's false prophets that is claiming that the earth is about to collapse, that climate change is going to kill all of us. Whether you take technology, whether you take the environment, whether you take food, whatever, politics, economic, education, whatever topics, those doom and gloom prophets. So therefore, this question asks you and I to think about issues such as climate change, extreme poverty. I know what those terms imply, but I often want to know, what do they mean? When I mention things like extreme poverty, it compels me to ask this question. Because when I look at history, it appears to me that all throughout the history of humanity, the majority of people in the world are always poor. So today, if I'm talking about extreme poverty, I'm pretty much making noise, because this is not nothing new. Okay? Oh, there's one: abortion, euthanasia. There's a new: human genetic selection, the cells of organs, human organ like kidneys, and way of increasing our happiness. There's another one: should smoking be outlawed given its dire consequences on society? Should we stop people from smoking? Should we make a law and say smoking is illegal? Any smoking? Well, that's a serious problem, because it appeared to me, I don't know about you, but you should know that, it appeared to me we're telling people you can smoke more. You know that here in our country, in the United States, and other parts of the world, we are making available to people things that were illegal a few years ago, like cannabis smoking and all other things. I read a study last year that there are several states in the United States that is actually making opiate legal, where your doctor can actually prescribe you with opiate for you to get high. So we are making more things available for people to smoke, but nevertheless, should we outlaw and ban smoking? And again, given its negative consequences on society as a whole. There's another one: should consensually sex between adult siblings should be decriminalized? That's a big one. I just read that in a report where somebody asked this question. In other words, should brothers and sisters having sex be decriminalized? Because currently it's called incest, right? If a brother and a sister will engage in consensual sexual activity, currently we say that's incest and it's illegal. I would imagine in many countries, and not all over the world, should that be decriminalized. In other words, currently it's a criminal act to engage in sexual act with sibling. Another one that is an old one: the sacredness of life. Well, that's a big one. You're going to have a problem identifying the sacredness of life, where the majority of country in the world, in many parts of the world, that killing an unborn child is legal. We call it abortion. Well, if life is sacred, then the incubator, the womb of a woman that bore the child for a number of time, is also a sacred domain, the sacredness of life. Those are the issue of the time, and those give me the idea how critical our time is. So we can see the manifestation of these concepts are actually present in our current state of affair all over the world, all over our news channel on a daily basis. Excuse me. With 24 hours technology and television, we can see those things permeating your TV screen 24 hours. One of the deepest philosophical questions is whether anything really matters. Does life matter itself? And these are provocative issues and are very challenging. I know you know that, and have the power to even change some of our personal beliefs about the wide range of real-world ethical and moral issues, because the noise makers are pumping those noise 24 hours a day, making noise. Now, here's the thing I'm sharing with my colleagues and my friends. If you're talking about any of those things I just mentioned, you're nothing but the noise makers. Yeah, that's what you are. You are noise makers. Why? All of the things I just mentioned, probably with the exception of two, like genetic, selective, and, abortion, it's not new. The method of abortion is new. With the exception of a couple of those things, if you're talking about like extreme poverty, the environment, wars, and all those sort of things, you're nothing but the noise makers. And the reason why I call you noise makers, because we've been talking about those things for centuries, and they still exist. I don't believe mankind have any plan or intention of stopping any of those things. So all these noise makers are just that, noise makers. That's what I call them, and I plan to explain what the fundamental aspect of these noise makers. The human experience encompasses a wide range of emotional, which includes tears and sorrow, because life, it's a combination of both. What we understand it to be joy and sorrow, suffering and happiness. And those aspects of life, as they manifested themselves in our emotion, help us to navigate the challenges of life on one hand, and enable us to appreciate the good moment, the good time. They enable us as well to empathize with those who are currently facing any challenges in the life. And so at the end, one can agree, and should I say, enable us to shift our understanding of the world around us. And so the question we should ask as well, how has the human condition attributed to the fundamental spectrum of human suffering as to how we experience life? That is a very important question. If life is filled with tears and sorrow and suffering, how is the human condition either perpetuated and attributed to some of our pain and suffering, as well as our tears and sorrow? One of the things I share with people in my practice, and I share this with my client oftentimes, there's a period of time I make it a point, I begin to take note that as I talk to people, I make it a point to bring the topic, the subject of the human condition. I was surprised, literally, I'm not kidding you. I was surprised to find out how many people have no idea, were completely oblivious to the concept of the human condition. I would mention the human condition, and I have people who would say to me, "Oh, do you mean the political system?" I'm like, "Oh no, that's part of the human condition." "Oh, do you mean war?" I'm like, "No, that's like part of the human condition." "Oh, do you mean the marriage?" I'm like, "No, that's part of the human condition." And they'll say, "So what is the human condition?" It was amazing. These are older people, these are not young people. I would say, "Well, what is your understanding of the human condition?" They would look at me, "What do you mean? What's happening overseas?" They were completely oblivious to the human condition. And so when you ask the question, how has the human condition attributed to the fundamental aspect of our human suffering and tears and sorrow, you're bound to get a very, very surprised response. How many people is completely unaware of the human condition? Yes, the human condition is inherently complex. We understand that it encompasses a broad spectrum of experience, which indeed includes suffering. This suffering can stem from various sources, such as physical pain, emotional distress, existential fear, okay, and societal injustice. Those are all part and parcel of the human condition. It is an intrinsic part of the human experience, shaping our perspective, value, as well as relationship. And at the same time, within the spectrum of suffering, there's also resilience, growth, and the capacity for compassion, which are equally fundamental aspects of life, or should we say the human condition. But yet the human condition do have great effect on how we experience life as a whole. Ever since the birth of mankind, suffering has been part of the human experience. The more we try to stop suffering, as it appeared to be, by force, the stronger it seems to become. And according to great teacher Buddha, we can finally rise above it through a proper understanding of what Buddhists call the four pillars and constant practice. This is not a lecture on Buddhism, but the great Buddha says lots of very, very interesting things about the human suffering. Like most great religion and ways of living, Buddhism is based on the reduction of all total mastery over suffering in human being. What makes Buddhism unique is that, unlike all the other religions, including Christianity and Judaism, that accept suffering as a punishment or atonement for one's sins, Buddhism, on the other hand, sees suffering as ultimately unnecessary phenomena. In other words, for those of you who are familiar with Buddhism, the Buddhism concept says that suffering is based on our own intention and desire to pursue things. And so therefore, the more desire you have, the more suffering you will birth in. The Buddhist tradition teaches that suffering is directly related to the fundamental aspect of human desire, greed, needs, wants, and desire, as well as the pursuit of pleasure. One of the study I'm looking at that I'm going to share with you very soon is our obsession with significance. How we're so obsessed with significance. And I don't have anything about things being significant in our life. I have a lot of things in my life that I consider significant, but there's an obsession with significance, and what that create lead us to a very, very dark side of life, causing us to pursue some of our dark side of matter. The obsession with significance. That's another lecture I plan. I'm currently writing it and put it together, and so I will share this with you. According to the Buddhism, suffering, or as they call it, the dukkha, is indeed linked to desire and the pursuit of material pleasure, unquote. The idea that is an attachment to desire lead to craving, which in turn lead to suffering with those desire, whenever those desire rather are not fulfilled. And so the great Buddhists say recognizing and letting go of this attachment can attain for a state of liberation and peace, known as what many have known as the nirvana. While this perspective may not encompass all aspects of human suffering, it offers some kind of insight into the role of how a desire actually very, very attributed to the fundamental aspect of our experience, and in the same token contributed or attributed to the human suffering. The pursuit of worldly material and pleasure deeply ingrained in human nature and influenced by various factors such as cultural norm, societal pressure, and individual desire. You and I should know that very well. We're living in a society that seems to equip materialism or material with happiness, joy, peace, contentment, and a false, I might say, a false sense of security. I know lots of my colleagues and friends that are very well off, materially speaking. And again, please don't get me wrong, I have absolutely nothing against material itself. This is material, this is material, and all the lights in front of me, which you cannot see, and I'm sure you're aware of them, they are material. The idea is when those material at the center become at the center of my life, and I attach to them and develop those dependency on those material. And then you and I know what we mean material. Of course, I'm not simply talking about a computer or pen or light or the camera I'm looking at to speak with you. You and I know very well what we mean by the pursuit of material. When those become the center of my life, attachment develop, and when those desires are not properly met, turn us into something else. Additionally, societal structure often reinforce the importance of material success in our life and the accumulation thereof, furthering, fueling our pursuit or desire to pursue worldly material gain. Changing deeply, entrenched in our influential and as well influence our behaviors and perception. If we were to change those, that would require deep introspection to become aware and significant shift in our mindset vis-a-vis our experience in this world, in its life, and to ask ourselves a very, very fundamental question. What exactly is more important to me? And that is a question many of us need to ask ourselves. A lot of people ask themselves this question every year, every day, every moment. And it would be well for us to ask ourselves this question. So is it reasonable then to suggest, therefore, that humanity is responsible for its own suffering? Well, when I first repeat that to myself, I'm like, whoa, well, that's a very bold statement, because there's a bunch of people that are suffering today to no fault on their own. And I should be aware of that. But given the broad spectrum of how we become so ingrained, attached, compelled, and drowning in the pursuit of material. Some people, the pursuit is power, believing that if they take a hold of power, that will bring significance in their life. You and I know very well, we live in a world where people will deceive the nations, the society, the community to engage in war for the purpose of staying in power. This is what we're talking about. This is what I'm talking about when I say, is it reasonable to suggest that humanity, therefore, is responsible for its own suffering? And when I say that, I remember there are those like the atheism or atheists who's blaming God and religion for human suffering. Many people, that's the biggest argument. That is the strongest argument to question the existence of God. That is evil and suffering in the world. And I know you probably hear that, but let me say it emphatically, that God is not responsible for human suffering. It's on the other hand, on the contrary, God is the only hope to stop human suffering, and God has proved that through life by God himself become human in the person of Jesus Christ and suffer and die for the suffering, the pain, and the tears and the sorrows of mankind. There are many aspects of human element that contributed very, very directly to human tears and sorrow and suffering. Regional conflict, as I just mentioned, like war, power struggle between individual and group, nation leading to conflict that resulted into war. You probably hear me say that before. I'm surprised that I'm living in a world, this is the 21st century, yet this very day, many people still believe that a loaded rifle, an AK-47, is the best weapon to bring peace in the world, to settle our conflict. We're still shooting and killing each other when we disagree with each other. Exploitation and oppression is another element that causes tears and sorrow. Inequality, the pursuit of power, we can't say that enough, and a wide gap between the powerful and the powerless. Those are concepts created by us in our pursuit of significance. Definitely, as I mentioned earlier, those doomsayers about the environment, I am fully aware of the human impact on the environment. As I mentioned that, it become aware to me, there's a bunch of people out there who's talking about the environment. There's a bunch of people who take on the social media, these noise makers I'm talking about, who's telling them there's nothing wrong with the environment, who's talking about how all we need to do, I'm not going to mention the names, but I plan to in the future. One of them I listen to a lot, who's making a case that the best way to deal with the environment is to make everybody rich. I laugh every time I hear the person say that he believes the best way to save the environment is to make all of us rich, to give us more money. I plan to show you an excerpt of where he says, he have a number actually. He says, if you give each person in the world, we're talking about, well, that minus the small group of people that's already billionaire and millionaire and rich, but he's talking about the extreme poor. The individual make a statement, say that by giving each of them $5,000 each, I don't know if you mean a year or a month, I would imagine it probably be $5,000 a year, and those people will come out of poverty. And he argued that if we take people out of poverty, they will then in turn become more responsible for the environment. I don't know. Sometimes I listen to some of those podcast people, and maybe some of you probably say that about me. That's okay. I wish you write this in the comment. I think those people are very confused. Make all of us poor, and that would be the savior of the environment. I think these people are very confused. And if they don't know they're confused, now they're really confused. But yeah, I am concerned about human behavior on the environment. And we have human rights violation, whatever that is, psychological effect, the desire for power. Yes, the pursuit of power, when left unchecked, will drive and has been known to drive selfish ambition, motive, give birth to greed, always lead to significant and contribute to human suffering in the world, as well as perpetuating conflict, inequality, injustice, and indeed environmental degradation. I am fully aware of that, and I'm not making light of those things. These indeed are very complex questions with no simple answer, and I am not claiming that I have the answer to those complex issues. While human action and choices certainly contribute to human suffering on individual as well as in society, it is also important for us to consider the external factors that often play a part in some of those aspects of human disaster as well as society as well. Okay, and so the pursuit of material pleasure and human desire in every aspect are directly related to the aspect of suffering. So there's a question I ask myself. You see, this is a series of questions. Should we continue to deceive ourselves in the pursuit of material pleasure, knowing fully that they always lead or are the cause of most of our suffering? Because this very day as I'm speaking with you, you and I know very well, billions of people all over the world are pursuing material gain. That's what they're pursuing. That's what they're going after. We have this thing that's called global marketing, right? Yeah, the market, whatever that is. I am not an economist, and I'm always perplexed by this thing that's called marketing. Well, I have to remember, if we were at the market, I wouldn't be able to purchase this item, computer I'm using to speaking with you. But we have this thing called the market. You know, the global market we have to which we use to exchange and to sell things and to exchange things and to accumulate things. So human suffering has many sources, often interconnected as well. And we have lots of understanding, and we should have lots of understanding of human suffering and the step we can take to alleviate, as I mentioned earlier, as shared in the tradition of the Buddhism, who give us a deeper exploration of how this topic is influencing our life. Okay, so there are a lot of things we do. Emotional and psychological pain. Emotional is like grief, sadness, anxiety, fear, depression, definitely contributed to the human suffering. And this type of pain often arises from personal loss, trauma, or mental health disorder. Loss, separation, the loss of a loved one. So there are many aspects when we talk about tears and sorrow. The problem of suffering, you and I are fortunate to live in a world in which we have benefited from the miracle of what we call modernity, the modern world or postmodern. This includes indoor plumbing, flushing toilet, easy access to clean water. We have electricity. Okay, some people have air conditioning. I never liked air conditioning. I prefer natural air, so when it's hot outside, I'll close the window, but at night I will open it for some air. I never liked air conditioning, but every building I go to, they always have air conditioning, and that's fine with me. So we have access to things that most people in the world do not have, and I think often we take those things for granted. And so we need to understand the psychological perspective of suffering, the philosophical and ethical perspective of suffering. We need to understand the different traditions that speak of human suffering in terms of tears and sorrow. And remember the question we asked, why is the human experience is filled with tears and sorrow? The Maslow, as you know, the hierarchy of needs. Okay, Abraham Maslow theory, why suffering on basic needs such as air, food, water. We speak of that, and some of you are aware of that. Okay, and things we can do, increase our focus, alertness, and mental understanding. Okay, we can practice things like mindfulness. In other words, to be aware of what's surrounding you, how human action, human tendency, human decision are, culprit to our majority of tears and sorrow. Okay? You can short circuit the anxiety caused by the human condition, like envy, the social conditioning, and other societal influence to control the toxic approach as the world continues to influence you and I, that we can find comfort in materialism and the pursuit of things which is often contributed to the human suffering. We need to build a deeper and a more intimate long-term relationship with the people in our lives, to let go of resentment, envy, grudges. Those are steps you and I can take to reduce the level of suffering. And to some extent, I believe that's what the Buddhists and Christianity, Jesus himself, talk about, those sort of things. Let go of resentment, envy, grudges, jealousy, greed. The Apostle Paul talked about that as well. To be more aware and forgive those who have wronged us. And also, most of the clients I work with have this thing to stop self-sabotaging ourselves when things go wrong, when things happen. In other words, if I make a decision and it didn't turn out the way I was anticipating, to learn how to not self-sabotage, but learn what just happened and make better and different decisions. Okay, we can do that. Okay, happiness by discovering a universal well-being, to understand that my life worth more than simply the things that I accomplish. The term cultural revolution is sometimes used to describe contemporary social movement and shift in a cultural attitude. Yes, particularly in the context of debate around social justice, identity politics, and cultural value. Those things are very intense and causing lots of confusion in the world in which you and I are living today. And so, while the Cultural Revolution continued to wage, the war of the Cultural Revolution is waging in every front in this thing that called the postmodern era. It's continued throughout history. That's not new. But in the recent decade, it's essentially to recognize the difference between historical movement and contemporary cultural shift in terms of the social scale, method, and the goal, as well as how those paradigm shifts in societal belief are impacting our own individual life. If you're concerned about the tears and sorrow, the suffering that we've been shared through the centuries, to the years, if you're concerned about why the human journey is so filled with tears and sorrow, pay attention to the events that are happening in our world today. In this 21st century, pay attention. Listen to the noisemakers, what they're saying. As I shared with you before, these noisemakers have intention. There's a group, organization, institution, and regions that are discontent, and the intention is to deconstruct and to reject. And many of them, if not all of them, they're very pretentious. What will happen? They will contribute to our pain and sorrow and tears and suffering. I'm not aware of anybody out there who have what I consider to be a hopeful, a systematic, sustainable plan to stop the tears and sorrow. If any, it's the other way around. I don't mean to be sound doom and gloom, but I have no intention of trusting or depending on anyone on the social media who's making promises to solve the human dilemma in terms of our tears and sorrow. The only thing I know is to put my faith and trust in the person of Jesus Christ who died on the cross of Calvary. Yes, that doesn't make my tears and sorrow to go away, but it certainly gives me something that no human being can give me. It gives me the hope and the belief that one day my tears and my sorrow will be the things of the past. Until then, may we continue to do what we do, to be the best version of ourselves, to understand how our actions have the potential of affecting each other. And I hope that you can find a way to believe, to understand that while material things in and of themselves are not wrong, but they cannot fulfill the yearning desire of the human heart to find peace, happiness, hope, and tranquility in this world. Only the spirit that beholds them, and that is the spirit that we all reach for, and have attest to the human suffering. That Jesus said, I come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. Until then, my friend, the only hope I can share with you is to put your faith and trust in this God who cares for us. God is a caring God, and God alone will be able to wipe away our tears and sorrows of life. Here's a question for you. Why is the human journey so filled with tears and sorrow? That was the beginning and the topic I shared with you. Provocative thoughts on world moral and ethical issue. Yes, we will continue to shed tears and sorrow, but we can do that with the hope that He who understands, He who created us, one day will wipe away all the tears from our eyes as He has promised. Until then, my friend, please subscribe to our podcast. Again, as I said earlier, give me some comment. You can critics my approach. You can make comments, but also subscribe to our podcast. Tell me what kind of guests you would like us to bring, because I don't want to have a podcast just for the sake of it. I want to share content and idea and engage in conversation that are useful. I do not want to become a noisemaker like all the noisemakers I'm calling. I want to share ideas, content, subject, topic that interest to you, that you can learn to better equip yourself to deal with those noisemakers that are creating the wave of indoctrination and the process increase to our tears and sorrow. Until then, thank you very much for joining me. Your time and your comment are appreciated. And again, for Mindful Conversation for Critical Time, my name is Eddie Pierre. Until next time, I will speak to you then. Thank you.